My right to support this bill. Look, I am not going to be able to do my contribution anywhere near as wonderful as the Leader of the Opposition, because that was a beautiful speech. But I can answer a few things, Madam Speaker. When you're here working and you've got yourself a job, what you can do, you can go to the jail if you commit a crime, but you could also go goose hunting, and our new pathway would built out in Harrison Dam, and you could also catch $1 million barramundi that the CLP introduced many, many years ago. So there are wonderful things to do here in the Northern Territory.
You have to wear a hat under that shade.
Yes, Madam. The Treasurer's noodle gets sunburn under that. So, Madam Speaker, this bill enacts legislation to repeal the limit on borrowing, commonly referred to as the debt ceiling. The $15 billion debt ceiling was introduced by the former Labor Chief Minister Michael Gunner in May 2021. That was because the failed Chief Minister couldn't trust himself or his Labor government to rein in spending. Madam Speaker, during the 2021 estimates, Michael Gunner said, and I'll quote, "This will strengthen accountability for our long-term debt reduction goals and send a clear message to the rating agencies that the government is continuing its budget repair program." Budget repair program. What a joke. Should be a stand-up comedian. Madam Speaker, back in 2018, just weeks before Christmas, the Gunner Labor government dropped a physical bombshell. It said the Territory was on track to rack up more than $35 billion by 2030. $35 billion by 2030. How many zeros? A lot. Madam Speaker, and I just want to remind the House that when the former government, mere 8 and a bit years ago, came to office, the debt was about 1.8, maybe 1.9, somewhere around there. So $1 billion a year, Madam Speaker, and yet our government is continuing to its budget repair program. Madam Speaker, the former Labor government admitted it was borrowing cash just to cover basic operating expenses. Labor was also borrowing to pay the interest on its ballooning loans. In March 2019, economist John Langland released a blueprint for budget repair. One of the 76 recommendations was the creation of a debt ceiling. Rather than being a cap on net debt or liabilities, the ceiling was a cap on total borrowing minus finance leases. Put simply, the legislation the Labor introduced gave itself the green light to keep on spending beyond its means, and spend they did. Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition said that I should acknowledge some of the things that the Labor government have done and how good they are. Madam Speaker, I will acknowledge this Labor government have put us in about $11 billion worth of debt. So they were very, very good at their spending. So I do acknowledge the Leader of the Opposition, what Labor have done, and they have put us into a world of hurt. Madam Speaker, by the time Michael Gunner resigned in May 2022, the debt had more than tripled since he came to office. When Territorians voted this CLP government into office, the debt sat at $11 billion. So just 18 months, the previous government decreased I'll start again. In just 18 months, the previous government debt increased by $2 billion. I didn't want to get that wrong. I'm almost going to say decreased. And how wrong could we be? But where has that money gone? What have you got to show for it? We've got a structure in Kavanagh Street. I don't call it a shade structure. I call it a structure in Kavanagh Street. We've got a highway where no matter where you travel, down through the centre or east or west, that gets cut every year. What our government is doing, which is in stark contrast to what the former Labor government doing, is to be upfront with Territorians. Treasurer Bill Yan has laid out the bare of the Territory's two economic challenges. During his statewide tour economy roadshow, Treasurer Yan highlighted Labor's failures on this approach, noting a record spending in police, the highest per capita in the nation, without corresponding investments in corrections or the courts. That's not a strategy, Madam Speaker, that's an imbalance. No long-term funding for corrections, which requires an estimated $50 million annually, which resulted in our crime going through the roof. He emphasised that for every dollar spent on police, at least $1.50 should be invested in the broader justice system, including legal services, courts and prisons. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results. That's madness. The decision to repeal the debt ceiling is a difficult but necessary one, and if we didn't do it, we'd be forced to make cuts, something that we simply won't do. We won't punish Territorians, Madam Speaker, for Labor's mistakes. Costly mistakes. Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition also told the House that she's going to get out her ruler and pen and read the budget books word for word. Madam Speaker, I've also done that. And I've done that in the 2024 budget. And Madam Speaker, in the 2024 pre-election Fiscal Outlook report, which is in there in black and white, and I asked the Opposition Leader to go and get that and have a read of it, because it talks about it was planning significant cuts to critical services. So this is in their own budget book, Madam Speaker. It's a public document, and if you do have the time to read it, turn to page 40, Madam Speaker, and have a read of what it says at page 40, about 3/4 of the way down. Territory-funded items that are currently budgeted to reduce or cease over the forward estimates include supplementary funding to support hospitals and corrections cost pressures. So, Madam Speaker, there are also time-limited funding for domestic, family and sexual violence to reduce programs. So, Madam Speaker, taking the Leader's Opposition's own advice and reading the budget book would tell you at page 40 they were going to cut the hospitals and corrections. Cut the hospitals, Madam Speaker. And domestic violence, which are two parts of the Territory which are drastically needed and required. We know that domestic and family violence is a scourge, and under the Labor government it kept going up. I think it was 82% increase in domestic and family violence. So, Madam Speaker, just let that think in, that this government want me to acknowledge what they've done, so I have acknowledged that they've overspent, put our debt up, and they acknowledged that they were going to cut the hospitals and corrections, and they were going to cut domestic violence. That's because Labor was so physically inept. Hospitals and corrections and DV prevention programs were going to be cut. Madam Speaker, it just laughs in the face of how the opposition, and that's why they're in opposition, because they're going to cut these crucial programs which keep the Territory safe and also keep the Territory in a healthy way. If you get sick, you should be able to go to the doctor. You should be able to go to the hospital. And if you're a victim of domestic violence, you should need help, and you need to make sure that you're safe. The Opposition Leader knew the funding for hospitals, corrections and domestic violence programs were coming to an end. She was in the Budget Cabinet. She knew about it. She knew about it in detail, Madam Speaker, and yet what did she do about it? Absolutely nothing. What a shame. Repealing the debt ceiling will give the government more flexibility to manage spending, address immediate budget pressures and plan for long-term financial stability, something the Labor government neglected to do. It will also allow for a stronger focus on boosting revenue and improving spending efficiency. The previous government set a debt ceiling knowing it would break. Rather than acting responsibility, it did everything it possibly could to disguise and hide and cover the truth. Madam Speaker, Labor deliberately excluded ongoing project funding from the forward estimates to mislead Territorians. The time-limited funding, Madam Speaker, they would put a program out and they would lock it in and they would fund it for 1 year and then they wouldn't fund it anymore. Because, Madam Speaker, because they knew if they did, they would breach their own debt ceiling. Shame. This was a deliberate attempt to hide the fact that Labor was driving the Territory into deeper debt. The previous government's actions were a betrayal of Territorians. Labor deliberately hid the truth, pushing its inevitable debt ceiling breach just beyond the forward estimates to avoid accountability before the election. Had Labor been re-elected, it would now be scrambling to explain why it smashed its own debt limit and plunged the Territory into further financial chaos. Instead of investing in crucial infrastructure like healthcare, aged care, mental health, priorities that matter to Territorians, it wasted taxpayers' pet projects like shade structures, art galleries, playgrounds, and of course my favourite, the $5,000 Christmas tree. Madam Speaker, Labor abandoned the needs of Territorians, leaving us with a deep financial mess and nothing to show for it. And the Treasurer has got a difficult job, and I've been working with him lately, and he's got his calculator out, and he's got a special calculator because he needs one because the debt is that bad. Madam Speaker, the CLP here today are putting Territorians first. That's what they voted for and that's what they deserve. I commend this bill to the House.